And it's November 16th, 2023, right here in Lagos. Good morning, good evening, wherever in the world you might be watching from. It's Business Morning, coming to you live from Channels HQ right here in Lagos. Let's get you the top stories that set your agenda. Now, we see Nigeria's inflation rate climbed further to 27.33% last month, up from 26.72% in September. That's according to the latest report from the National Bureau of Statistics. The figure, which is in line with projections by financial derivatives company FDC, marks the 10th consecutive month of inflationary pressure in the country. Key highlights of the data from the National Bureau of Statistics shows that food inflation, which is the main factor, rose against the previous month. Core inflation jumped 22.58%. Urban inflation rose about 29.29%, while rural inflation climbed to 25.58%. With the latest reports, the financial market now awaits the next action to be taken by the new Central Bank Monetary Policy Committee as its next meeting, which according to its calendar is scheduled for November the 20th to the 21st. We'll be waiting for an official statement from CBN for that meeting. And the Securities and Exchange Commission says it has embarked on the creation of a new e-dividend portal, which is expected to become operational on the 30th of November 2023. The Director General of the SEC, Lamido Ugodre, made this known at the Commission's ongoing Journalists Academy in Lagos, organized by the Nigerian Capital Market Institute. He explained that once operational, the portal will improve and simplify the process of mandating accounts for e-dividends, which will lead to a significant fall in unclaimed dividends. At the same time, Mr. Ugodre mentioned that the SEC aims to achieve a 50% market cap to GDP ratio target in 2026. And the House of Reps is to investigate the alleged non-remittance by NNPCL of over 34.2 billion naira to the Federation account of the Nigerian liquefied natural gas from 2004 to 2021. Honorable Sani Bala moved the motion, alleges that the money has been diverted by the NNPCL. The House has mandated its relevant committees to carry out an investigation and report back within 2 weeks. Let's get a check on the oil market now. See, oil prices fell today, extending losses from the previous session as signals of higher supply from the United States met worries about lackluster energy demand from China. Brent futures was down about 48 cents to $80.70 a barrel, while US WTI crude shed about 53 cents to $76.13 a barrel. Both benchmarks fell more than 1.5% in the prior session. WTI's front-month contract also traded below the price for the second month, a structure known as contango, suggesting that investors expect prices to increase. The front-month discount to the second month traded was at minus 17 cents today. And as the capital market in Nigeria continues to grow, the role of investment bankers in connecting investors with investment is becoming more apparent. With the rise of inflation and currency devaluation, so investment bankers now have to do more in channeling investments to the right assets. This was the view of industry stakeholders as the Association of Issuing Houses in Nigeria held its Investment Banking Awards night in Lagos earlier this week. And for our first conversation now, we're going to be talking about drilling down on the inflation data that came out yesterday. That's in the moment. Do stay with us. And data from the National Bureau of Statistics shows Nigeria's annual inflation rate rose to 27.33% in October from 26.72% in the previous month. According to the report, the food inflation rate in October quickened to 31.52%. We also see forecasts of inflation coming at about 30% at the end of this year. Joining me now for this conversation is Ugodre Obichukwu, CEO Nairametrics. Join me via Zoom. Great to have you on the show. Good morning.
Same here. Morning.
So before we get into the inflation data, we see the Joint National Executive Council of the two leading labor unions, which declared the strike in Nigeria recently. That's the Nigeria Labour Congress and the Trade Union Congress. Everyone's talking about that, yesterday, but they've announced a suspension of the industrial action at the end of a meeting last night. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it's a good development. Nobody wants labor unions going on strike, especially when we all know the economy is in a precarious situation. It's one thing to ask yourself, how did we even get here? How is it that you have the leader of the country's labor union being beaten? Whatever the reason is, whether because he went to Imo State on political reasons or not, you don't want violence on any person at all, not to talk of someone who is a union leader. But I think the government has waded into this as quickly as possible. Probably shouldn't have gotten even to where they had to embark on a one-day strike. Also important to know that the people of Imo State have also gone days, if not weeks, without electricity because of this issue. So that obviously has impacted on the economy of that state. But I think government should try as much as possible to avoid issues like this. We don't want the economy grounded to a halt for issues that are largely political, not that it serves anyone in the larger scheme of things. Nigerians don't benefit from this, neither does the government. So I'm happy that this has been quelled, and let's just hope that we never see anything like this as we approach the end of the year.
Yeah, hopefully, because the strike culture quite apparent right here in Nigeria. But let's get into the data now. We've seen the US CPI slowed for October. In the UK, the same thing. We see a drop in inflation numbers. Then our neighbor right here, we see Ghana's inflation rate also dropped to about 35.2% in October, lowest in 14 months. Looking at the inflation numbers for Nigeria, why is ours going against the global trend right now?
It's a very good question, but there are different countries and different complexity and different issues. For Nigeria, if you ask, the average Nigerian, they would even doubt the current inflation numbers. For a lot of people, their personal inflation, it's actually a lot higher. But this is CPI, so the methodology is obviously different. Nigeria is still going through different cycles of reforms, and so for that reason, you would continue to see inflation sticky over the next few months. At 27.33%, that of course reflects some of the things that we've seen happen in the last few months. You've seen fuel subsidy go off, you've seen exchange rate continue to depreciate, and these are all pass-through items that often impact inflation rate. And so that is why it's likely going to remain sticky, like we've always said. But let's also remember that we also are experiencing some reduction month on month, excuse me, from 2.89% in July, and it rose to 3.18% in August. It has, however, dropped to 2.1% in September, and now 1.73% in October. That is month-on-month inflation. So on a month-on-month basis, we are seeing inflation rate sort of taper down, but on an annual basis, it's still rising. There is prediction or suggestion or forecast that we could hit 30% by the end of the year before things start to turn around. But Nigeria's situation is obviously different from Ghana. Ghana has gone through cycles of galloping inflation, hit their peak, and now they seem to be tapering down. That could also be due to base effects, and not like there's anything major that has happened in Ghana. Nigeria would also experience its own base effects at some point. But for now, I don't think that we've plateaued yet. Very likely to see a lot more higher inflation as we approach the end of the year.
Now, we know the CBN did say yesterday that they are happy with the slowing rates there month on month, for the inflation data for October. But would you say somehow there's some kind of light at the end of the tunnel, looking at inflation at this point?
I don't think there's light at the end of the tunnel yet. If you ask me, there's still a number of things that haven't come up yet. A lot of people are yet to reflect their prices. The exchange rate depreciation that we've seen between August, September, and October hasn't yet reflected on new inventories that will be coming in as we approach the Christmas season. So I think that you're going to see a lot more price increases, and that's why I said earlier that inflation is going to remain sticky up until even the first quarter of next year. Let's remember as well that they are yet to increase electricity prices, so that is also still being held down. And so long as that is held down, you're not actually seeing the true cost of doing business in Nigeria from an inflation perspective. So there's still a lot of headwinds down the line. Nobody still knows what is going to happen to crude oil prices as we move on. There are predictions that we could go past $100. Some people suggest that it could actually go lower as the global economy also starts to shake. But with the Israeli-Hamas war or Palestinian war, there is also fear that crude oil prices could go up as well. So if they do go up and exchange rate will continue to face exchange rate pressures, then it's difficult to think that there's light at the end of the tunnel, because fuel subsidy has been removed, and so that pass-through cost is going to come down to Nigerians. And when they come down to Nigerians, it immediately reflects on food prices, which, like you mentioned earlier, was above 30%. So I do not see an immediate, I don't see light at the end of the tunnel just yet, except for perhaps base effects. There's still a lot of things that the government needs to do to ensure that we don't go past 30%. Inflation rate at the turn of the year. It's very likely that we hit 30%, but staying above 30% is now left to the government.
Yeah, quite interesting. Can't wait to start reporting a slowing in our inflation rate, going forward. But yesterday, the former governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria, Mohammed Sanusi II, he said the CBN's lending to the federal government under the administration of former President Muhammadu Buhari through Ways and Means triggered inflationary pressure in Nigeria and weakened the value of the naira. Let me have your thoughts on this. And how do you tackle this kind of inflation, really?
It's very much correct. Let's recall that before we started seeing the central bank extend what would have been short-term loans to the government, money supply was nowhere close to 20 trillion. Today, money supply is 66 or so trillion, and likely to be even more by the time the central bank releases the latest money supply data. That, of course, means that there's a whole lot of money in the economy, and that also has affected inflation, by the way, and of course, exchange rate. Now, my own concern even is I was looking at the MTF, the medium-term expenditure framework of the government for the next 3 years, and even the 2024 budget. You still see elements of the same kind of economic policies that the Buhari administration had in the current administration. So they have gone for a wide fiscal deficit budget, and also they've also gone for revenue targets that you would look at, if you look at it in the sense of being a bit unrealistic. So when you have unrealistic revenue targets and you have wide fiscal deficit, then pretty obvious that the government might be looking at borrowing again. And we do know that it's pretty difficult tapping into the foreign debt market. You can keep tapping into the local debt market, which they've been doing, but for the size of revenue gap that they could face in 2024, they are likely going to go back to Ways and Means. It might not be at the level that we saw during the Buhari administration, but very likely that they could still tap into the Ways and Means. So that is a bit of a concern to me. And if you also look at that medium-term expenditure framework as well, they also did estimate or forecast that money supply will go past 70 trillion, almost 80 trillion over the next 3 years. And so those are things that you look at and you ask yourself, where exactly is the silver lining? How are they going to contain inflation when spending is going to keep going, at least at the federal level? There is argument that Nigeria's federal budget is not that huge compared to GDP, and of course when you compare it to other countries, and so the government does need to spend more, but you have to sort of situate it to Nigerian context. And right now you're trying to address inflation and weakening exchange rate. You don't address that by continuing with the sort of wide fiscal deficit budgets that the government is currently embarking on. So that's a concern for me. In terms of the CBN and what it might do, there's really not that much. inflation has always been driven by structural issues in Nigeria. It's always been, supply side issues. You talked about the US, you talked about Ghana, you talked about Europe. For a lot of these countries, it's always been demand related issues, and so monetary policy does work. So in Nigeria, it will work to an extent. I'm not saying that the central bank can't do anything. They still need to, you'll likely see MPR likely go up again. They need to also increase the interest rates so that that could also reduce the amount of naira that is chasing dollars. But beyond that, the government needs to sort out a number of things. We still have, energy crisis, if I can put it that way. Nigerians are still battling with, rising fuel prices, and so the government's plan to perhaps move into CNG as a way of powering transportation, they need to fast track that because so long as fuel prices continue to go up, people are going to find ways to push that cost to Nigerians, and that also adds to inflation. And then when it adds to inflation, that also leads to further currency depreciation. So that needs to be addressed quite urgently. Then, of course, there are also structural issues around ease of doing business. There's a lot of transportation bottlenecks. I'm happy now that the rains are almost over, and so the government can focus on fixing roads and then continue with all the infrastructure plans they've had with rails. People need to be able to move food from one part of the country to the other without losing a huge part of their products because of transportation issues or because of roadblocks or from security agencies that should actually allow things move. So they need to fix all the structural issues. Of course, you also have multiple taxation issues and corruption issues at some part of government agencies that do also add to rising cost of goods and services. So that needs to be addressed as well. And then finally, where the CBN can also come is the forex. They have put forward the so-called reforms that we all wanted them to do in terms of forex, but we haven't seen liquidity come in. Liquidity does need to come in. They're working very hard to ensure that we get FX liquidity. Until that is resolved, you're unlikely to see things sort of stabilize. If you get FX stability, where the exchange rate at the official market is sort of stable, not the kind of yo-yo that we're seeing at the moment, and then you get the black market rate also stable. And more importantly, the premium between the black market rate and the official rate, no more than 10% at the most. I think then we can start to see we're gradually turning the corner. At the moment, that is not happening. And so for me, these are the issues that I think need to be resolved quickly if we're to get inflation downwards.
So many issues to be addressed at this point, but it all lies on the new leadership of the CBN, at this time. Looking at ways and means, you still see this new leadership, lending to the federal government in a big way. And is there any chance for a soft landing for the Nigerian economy, going forward in the short term?
Soft landing, I wouldn't say there's a chance for a soft landing because we already had a hard landing, right? So it's just how do we evacuate ourselves safely enough, because this is a hard landing. You don't have a soft landing when you had the sort of exchange rate devaluation that we've had over the last few months. You don't have a soft landing when you've had fuel subsidy removed right away. There's just no soft landing there. So it's all been a hard landing. It's now how do we make sure that people are evacuated safely and then we recover very well, if I can use those sort of terms. But for the central bank, yes, like I mentioned, I do think that they will continue to extend loans to the FG via ways and means. Now, mind you, it is not illegal. What was illegal was extending beyond what was provided for in the law, in the CBN Act, which is 5% or so of the government's previous revenue. I hope that's correct. Yeah. So that is, so long as they fall within that ambit, and then the government also repays those loans, then it's fine, because ways and means is basically an overdraft against revenue that you're expecting. So I do see that happening, with this government. And by the way, some of the money that they've expended over the last few months, especially when they took over, was also ways and means. We heard that there was a 4 trillion or so, that was pulled out during the election period and when the new government came in. So it's very likely that might continue. It's a huge problem. Where are they going to get money from? Government needs to continue. So if they can't get enough money from crude oil, export, or from taxes, then they would have to resort to ease. I mean, good enough. We're seeing crude oil production output going up. We're gradually hitting, 1.4, 1.5 million barrels per day. But I hope that they can sustain that. And we need to be at 1.8 million barrels per day. It's a must. We have to be there by the first quarter of next year if we're even to have any glimmer of hope that we're going to get this sort of soft evacuation that you're looking for.
Yeah, definitely looking forward to that, soft landing, because the wallet is really hit hard at this time. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Ugodre Obichukwu, CEO, Nairametrics. Thank you.
My pleasure.